So you want to talk about numbers in video games, do you?
Fucking nerd!
Well, so do I, but I don't really have a plan on how to deliver my ideas, so this video is probably just going to be a bunch of rambling. So in pretty much any competitive video game, you'll deal damage to your opponent in some form. Let's first look at scale. Whether your characters have 10 health or 1000 health, all that really matters is how much damage is dealt in percentage of total health. For example, in Team Fortress 2, the Scout has 125 maximum health under most circumstances, and a single rocket from a soldier does about 100 damage, which is 80% of the Scout's health. It doesn't matter if we multiply or divide the numbers by 10, it's still gonna be 80%. I generally prefer smaller numbers to be used, or at the very least, as small as you can make them while still keeping figures relevant. And what I mean by that is, well, let's say we did multiply all the numbers by, fucking 100. If we add exactly 1 point of damage, it is now 80.008% of the Scout's health, which is effectively just the same as flat 80%. Cutting the numbers down to what will actually affect gameplay, while not really necessary or even technically beneficial, is nice simply because it's easier to understand at a glance. What the fuck are you doing, Paladins? So when you're balancing how much damage things do, it's important to keep in mind that it's less about the numbers and more about the thresholds that the numbers cross. Example, the direct hit, which is an alternate rocket launcher, deals 25% more damage compared to stock, which is a decent amount of damage, but more importantly, the soldier can now kill light classes in only 1 rocket from full health, compared to the default rocket launcher which takes 2 rockets. So in a 1v1 situation that admittedly ignores a lot of the context of a real game, that 25% extra damage is essentially double damage, as it halves the number of hits that you need to land. Speaking of effective health and damage, how about damage over time effects? The Southern Hospitality is a wrench that applies a bleed effect, which does 40 damage over 5 seconds. And yes, while I'm still talking about TF2, my points still apply to other games. It's just easier for me to just use one game for my examples. So with the base damage of 65 plus the 40 bleed damage, you could technically do 105 damage per hit, which kills 8 of the 9 classes in 2 hits. The problem is that those 5 seconds don't stack with each other. The timer is simply reset to 5 on each hit. So in an actual fight, ignoring the fact of course that melee combat is a bad idea, that 40 damage per hit is gonna be a lot closer to like 10 or 20 per hit. Plus like another 20 or so after they disengage or you die. So you're actually hitting people 3 or 4 times to kill them anyways, just like a regular wrench. And in fact, against light classes, both the regular wrench and the Southern Hospitality take exactly 2 swings to kill. The extra damage from the bleed does not cross the threshold needed to make the wrench kill in 1 hit. Although this is a pretty bad example of a DOT, damage over time, because the numbers, well, kinda suck. So let's take a different example. In Risk of Rain 2, burn and bleed do very similar things. Damage over time based on the number of stacks that are applied. But burn is relatively useless past the first couple of stages, while bleed stays good for significantly longer, both because it's easier to apply stacks consistently, and that the timer is reset every time a new stack is applied. So the amount of damage you're dealing with bleeds will only go up and up as you apply more stacks, as opposed to burn, which will reset after a few seconds. However, as the run goes on, bleed tends to fall off as well, because the damage over time doesn't keep up to the big singular hits. The enemies tend to die before the bleed can do any significant amount of damage. So damage over time is almost always outclassed by single hits, but they do have more use to them than just that, because it acts as a deterrent. If you're afflicted with a DOT, you're probably going to disengage to heal, which costs time and positioning, or you'll have to battle with a disadvantage in health. Which leads into another point. Damage threats. Sometimes the actual damage that is dealt isn't really a consideration. As long as there is a threat of damage in any capacity, it can be enough to deter people. The damage I would take here by approaching would be rather inconsequential, but the fact that I can choose to wait for an opening and not take any damage is enough for me to keep my distance. Furthermore, a skilled player can use that one small hit to steamroll into a huge punish. So this attack that is technically low damage and low threat is in actuality a huge threat if you're not careful. Uh-oh, opinion warning! I don't like this design, mostly in fighting games. Sure, it incentivizes and rewards good play and dedication to a character, but when you get 40 to 50% off a move that's incredibly low risk simply because you've developed muscle memory, well, that's kinda fucking lame. There should be some sort of read or risk involved, or at the very least, make the combos themselves really difficult to input consistently. Keep in mind I'm shit at fighting games and don't play any of them regularly. I just enjoy backseating game design. So, shifting focus onto less PvP-centric games and more single-player PvE-type games, ultimately, the most important part of any weapon is how much damage you can dish out. Player expression and self-imposed challenges aside, there will always be a point where higher damage on a weapon eventually causes you to switch, regardless of other stats. Wow, it's almost as if it's the most important stat and directly correlates to how effectively you can achieve the goal of the game. But something else to consider is not just the big raw damage number at the top, but the damage per second. Sure, with a huge damage number, with a low rate of fire, you can annihilate a target immediately, but what happens when you have multiple targets, or if you don't kill them in one hit? You're kind of just a sitting duck, not to mention all the excess damage that just ends up being overkill. If you spread the same amount of damage out between the multiple shots that you could fire within the same time frame to have the same DPS, you're much better at dealing with crowds and you aren't nearly as dicked if you miss a shot, as you still have the majority of your damage that can still hit. Ooh, transition, ooh. The effective health of characters can be changed via damage multipliers, active healing, and armor. The formula that determines how much damage is reduced by armor can vary pretty wildly, but thankfully Team Fortress 2 once again has an easily digestible example, so I can continue using that. By default, a level 3 sentry gun has 216 health, which is already more than 8 of the 9 classes. But by whipping out the Wrangler, a bubble shield is applied to it which blocks 66% of incoming damage, effectively tripling the sentry's health to 648. That's pretty easy to understand, but less than easy is when you take healing into account. Your effective extra health if you're being healed is entirely dependent on how much DPS you have incoming as well as how much healing you have incoming. While taking damage, the default medigun heals for 24 health per second. If you have 24 or less damage per second incoming, you effectively have infinite health. But that isn't a very realistic scenario. A soldier or demoman would have to count to 5 between shots to get their DPO as low as that in a 1v1. So it's been a while since I took a math class, so bear with me a bit, but your effective health is dependent on your total health, the rate of healing, and the incoming damage. Say you have 200 health and you get hit with 75 damage per second and you're being healed at 24 health per second. You're effectively taking 51 damage per second, so it would take just short of 4 seconds to kill you. Which in retrospect is an easier way to think of how healing affects damage numbers, but I'm too far deep at this point. So if that 75 damage per second took just about 4 seconds to kill you, you effectively had 300 health. If you double your base health to 400, it would take 7.8 seconds to kill you, so you would effectively have 588 health in this example. As long as you don't change the incoming damage or healing in this setup, you will always have around 47% more effective health. But changing either the incoming damage or the healing will alter that percentage, so yeah, trying to think of active healing as a change of effective health is kinda needlessly complicated. So just think of it as a change in effective incoming DPS. Well, I've kinda exhausted everything I wanted to say in general about damage numbers. I could continue, but it would honestly just delve into more game-specific criticism. And we can't be having that, because that might actually be entertaining and a useful observation. Video games aren't just spreadsheets and formulas after all. You gotta account for player expression, sound and visual design, gameplay, gimmicks, movement, and a bunch of other stuff as well. Regardless, I hope this dumb little rant was enough to distract you from life for a little while. And I also hope, my dear viewers, to see you soon.